Hello and welcome to our London History Podcast, where we share our love of London, its people, places and history. This podcast is designed for you to learn things about London that most Londoners don't even know, all in 20 minutes. I am your host, Hazel Baker, qualified London tour guide and CEO of londonguidedwalks.co.uk. Show notes plus photos and recommended reading can be found on each associated episode's webpage. Simply go to londonguidedwalks.co.uk/podcast. Don't forget, if you enjoy what we do, then please rate and review. It warms the cockles of my heart to read your appreciation of this labour of love. Get that cup of tea, put your feet up and enjoy. Joining me today is Lesley Russell, a retired teacher living in Australia. When playing around on a well-known genealogy site, she turned up some connections to several Huguenot families who came to England as refugees from religious persecution in 1572. She began some serious digging into the vaults of internet search engines and anything else she could lay her hands on to discover more about them and the times in which they lived. The result? 2 updated studies of 2 notable medical and clergy families, the Delaunes and the Chamberlains, related by marriage. Both these families came to England as refugees, found royal favour, and established a dynasty. The main name we know about now is Gideon DeLaune, but Lesley, would you like to introduce us to the DeLaune family?
It starts with the father, William DeLaune. He was born in about 1530, went to Montpellier to study as a physician. At some point in that time, became a member of a believer in the French Reformed Church, which is the Protestant church in France. They're very Calvinistic, very, very tough people, I think, very hardline, quite fundamental Christians in many ways. He also studied for the ministry, and he became a minister. And he was living in Occitan, and he married the daughter. His father-in-law was probably the minister of the French Reformed Church in a little town called Uzès, which is a beautiful little town near the Pont de Gard, and it's one of my favorite places in France. And they married there and proceeded to have a family. Well, father-in-law died, and about 1570. And he returned to Normandy at that point. He asked to be released from his ministry in the south and to go north because he had the support of his own children, his wife's sister as well, and clergymen didn't make a lot of money. The 24th of August, 1572, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre occurred, and there were thousands of killings all over France of Protestant Christians. And this set off this great flood of refugees to come to England. Now, they came to the south of England. From France, they mostly came to the south of England. At the same time, the Protestants in the Low Countries, which were under the control of Spain, were having their problems. And they were coming to England and coming to the east coast of England, to Norwich and Suffolk and places. But they landed in Rye. Of course, it was a port in those days. It was on the coast. And there were so many refugees arrived in Rye at that point, something like 1,500 people, which is in different times. They actually appealed to Elizabeth I for financial help to support them. You've got to really sort of think of how little these places must have been and to have these floods of people coming through. They stayed in Rye for a while, and another child was born there. And then they made their way to London, and they moved into Blackfriars. At this point, there were 4 boys. There was probably a child came with them, a son, who died in 1589.
And how do we know about this one?
All the foreigners there was a census taken of them, the Return of Strangers it was called, which remarks that William DeLaune has 1 male and 3 male children, that extra taxes had to be paid for if you were a foreigner. So we know there was a 3rd son. He became a physician in London. He served at the church, at the French Reformed Church in Threadneedle Street.
Did you want to expand about the Liberty at Blackfriars?
In the Liberty, they were not subject to the rules and regulations of the City of London. So it was an independent sort of enclave within the city. And it had a very, very mixed population of aristocracy, foreigners, artisans, all sorts of people were living in this area. And the freedom that they had in the liberty was inherited from the friar, and they were free from city taxes, arrest by city officials. They were free to practice crafts without belonging to a guild, and they attracted a lot of foreign artisans because of that. Because if you were foreign, you couldn't join the city guilds. It was a Puritan stronghold, so their church was a very Puritan church. It was within the Church of England, but still that Puritan ethic within the church. There was a sizable French community in there as well, and he became part of that. And then when the monastery was sold to the master of the king's rebels, the building was all converted into apartments, and you can imagine it must have been quite chaotic in lots of ways. I think the tenancy that he took was 7 rooms in the great hall of the monastery, which is the Great Frater. Now, the interesting thing about this is the room where Catherine of Aragon sat and refused to defend herself against the papal legate, Cardinal Wolsey. So this is right in the middle of the history of England to start with. And it was a big area and 7 rooms. So he was doing okay. He really was. But there were 5 more children born. He resumed his medical practice. He was forbidden to be a minister and a physician in those times. It was not allowed. So he appealed to the College of Physicians and pleaded his case, and he was granted permission to be both minister and physician. And he then had his medical qualifications, or his degree, incorporated at Cambridge. So he was doing okay in that way. In 1583, he published a major theological work, which must have taken him years and years and years to do, which was a treatise, I thought, on Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion. And that was published many times into different languages, and was a major work of study for Calvin's religious teachings and things. He became a very influential member of the society he was living in. The Blackfriars circle included people, his neighbour, Lady Elizabeth Russell, was the sister-in-law of Lord Burleigh's sister-in-law. Nicholas Bacon's sister was another brother-in-law of hers. We're talking people right at the top of not only social standing, but of academic and intellectual standing in the city as well. In 1593, he bought a large building, a large tenement within the Blackfriars thing. The original apartments, the Great Frater, those rooms in the Great Frater, were sold to James Burbage, the theatrical entrepreneur, and he wanted to start a theatre there. Puritans did not want that theatre to happen at all, and so they fought very bitterly against it, and they won. And James Burbage, he lost a lot of money. He actually died the following year. It was a very bitter and difficult time, I think. His son actually managed to open the theatre in 1608, but this is why we see the Playhouse Yard in the Blackfriars area. And the rooms had been used earlier by an Italian fencing master.
It sounds like a very exciting place to live. Lots of people from different ways of life trying to make their way in the city of London with certain constraints, and them having to find ways round it in order to succeed.
Very dynamic, very exciting, all sorts of people. That's right. I mean, Vautolier, who was the best publisher in England at the time, another Frenchman, was living there. There were all sorts of interesting people living there, and they were their own environment, in their own environment. They weren't under the control of other people. It must have been quite an extraordinary place to be, really. So William died in 1610, and by the time he died, he was a very, very respected member of that whole society. His wife had died a couple of years before. He asked to be buried in the churchyard as near to his dear wife as he could. And it's a lovely thing of a family man, a life and thing that you read in this. He left quite a lot of property to his children. He was able to lend something like £350 to somebody, and which was a lot of money in those days, you know.
And how was he making his money then? Because this is huge amounts.
through his medical work and through the supply of drugs and medications and things, because that was quite a lucrative thing. And that leads on to Gideon. Gideon, his eldest son, became an apothecary, and it's very likely that he studied under his father, with his father. When his father died, there were accounts for as much as £200 that were owed to him for medical supplies and things. So it gives you an idea of sort of some of the sums of money that might be being dealt, Here he's got this large family of boys, and what do you do with them? Well, you have to get them educated. Gideon became an apothecary, and possibly at that point, because he was still making his way, and so he had to start working. The other boys all went to universities in England and in Europe. Isaac became a physician and studied at Leiden. Leiden in Holland was very much the university that Protestants went to. He studied medicine in Leiden. Peter went to Cambridge, which was the Protestant university. He studied theology, and he also went to Leiden, and he became the minister of the Dutch Reformed Church in Norwich. Nathaniel went to Geneva and Leiden and studied there and became a minister, then went and worked in Dieppe. His university expenses were paid for by the parish in Dieppe on the requirement that he would go back and work for them. Paul became a physician, and he studied at Cambridge and then went to Padua. And Padua was a great medical university, and he studied there, and he spent several years in Ireland in the service of the Lord Deputy. He was a professor of physics at Gresham College, and he was an army doctor. He had a really interesting career. And the girls, well, Sarah married Peter Chamberlain, the male midwife, who, with his brother, they were the inventors of modern forceps. They have a place in medical history. And there were two other daughters, Esther and Elizabeth. Esther married a clergyman, and Elizabeth married a goldsmith, and they all lived in London, and they all, in most of them in Blackfriars there, and they must have been he makes a reference to it being quite a nursery at one stage, or William makes a reference to the nursery with all these children and grandchildren and everything all around. But Gideon stayed in Blackfriars. He didn't go off to university anywhere else. He married Judith Chamberlain, who was the Chamberlains. There were a lot of Chamberlains, seems to be quite a common name. But Abraham Chamberlain was a merchant, and Thomas Chamberlain was a merchant as well. And she was connected to that family. They had 13 children, and only 2 survived to adulthood, which it just doesn't bear thinking about. But in 1592, he sort of really first appears named as an apothecary on a lease signed for a large Blackfriars property that included the use of a shared privy and the obligation to pay towards church and minister maintenance. So, you weren't allowed to get away with just being there. You had to do all the right things. 1606, he was appointed a royal apothecary to Queen Anne, the wife of James I. There were a lot of French appointments to the court at that point. He was paid £20 a year for it, which doesn't seem a great deal of money, but medications and drugs brought in hundreds of pounds. And when you think that things like coral dissolved in pomegranate juice was a medication that was recommended. Dissolved pearls, powdered unicorn horn was considered a universal cure-all, as a protector from poisons and a preserver of youth. So it was still very much the age of the weird and the wonderfuls, but the world was changing. The exploration of new countries and what have you, new things were coming in, new plants, new medications, new ideas. He made a great deal of money, Gideon DeLaune, with the invention or the concoction of a stomach pill, a great purgative, and the king liked it very much, and it made his fortune for him, and he did become a very, very rich man, and it was still being sold a long time after his death. He became a freeman of the city in 1623. That was after a special act of petition to the king. His civic duties added to those that he had with the apothecaries. He was appointed to the Court of Common Council, which was the city's legislating body, but his foreign birth prevented him from becoming an alderman. And he was elected in 1625 as an alderman, but had to stand down because he was foreign. He bought large properties in Kent and in Bedfordshire, and he bought more property in Blackfriars. So all the time, he's really prospering. He's doing very well for himself indeed. And in 1635, he applied for denization, which was the act of, by special decree from Parliament, of becoming a citizen. So he had to do that in order to be able to leave his property to anybody. Foreigners couldn't leave property to people. That's just a brief thing about Gideon's personal life, really, and what was going on, but he's mostly remembered for his efforts with the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries, and he is considered to be their founding benefactor. Medicine was becoming far more scientific. I mean, this is it. And we're getting away from the old herbal things and what have you. We were actually at the beginning of creating the idea of drugs that really work, and we want to know why they work, and we want to control the quality of them, because you don't want just anybody calling themselves an apothecary and going on and causing harm. By 1610, the apothecaries were ready to separate. They wanted their own guild. They appeared before the grocers to state their case, and Gideon, who was the leader of the campaign, was dismissed because he was foreign. So out you go, we're not going to listen to you. Foreigners were not admitted to London guilds at that time, and their appeal was dismissed. So that then they petitioned to the king, and his response was much more positive and prompt. And as we said, he was very interested in medical affairs of his own life. The grocers protested, but they failed to win their case. And it took three years, by 3 years of negotiating and backwards and forwards and things, the charter was granted to them on the 6th of December 1617. Only freemen of London could be members of the grocers, but the apothecaries didn't have that stipulation in their thing. They were allowed foreigners. There were 5 foreigners admitted as members to the new society, and Gideon, of course, was one of them. And so he was very, very influential in that. The charter allowed for pharmaceutical practice to become a profession rather than a trade. And apothecaries shared control of the profession with the physicians, but they under the supervision of the physicians, and it produced an improved pharmacopoeia. Members could make, buy, sell drugs, and they could train apprentices and supervise the quality of drugs, prosecute and punish fraud, and advance the science of therapeutic medicine. So they're aiming high. They're really wanting to lift the game completely and become regarded as a professional body rather than a trade.
It's a whole new world for them, isn't it? Something that they are also helping to create.
It is a whole new world. That's right. That's right. And they were successful. And to this day, they examine and they hold their standards very, very high indeed. But Gideon, as well as being instrumental in getting to the king and getting the charter agreed to and things, he assisted greatly in the purchase of the Blackfriars property, which Cobham House it was called. Had been the Friary's guest house, and it was next to his own property. And in 1632, he loaned them quite a deal of money to buy that property. His drive and determination was crucial to the founding of the society. And in a minuted memorial in 1648, it says, "It is hereby declared and so thought fit by the court that the same Mr. DeLaune was a principal means for the procuring of the said company to be made into a corporation, and for the purchasing of the capital messuage which now belonging to the said company called Apothecaries Hall." So by this time, Gideon was in his 80s. He was born in 1565, and so here we are now in 1648, and he gets this formal recognition. His royal appointment had ended with the death of the Queen and with the arrival of Charles the First, and there were no more royal appointments. Because a lot of these royal appointments, of course, were Protestants, and James the First was much more leaning to that Scottish Calvinistic thing as well. So with Charles and with Henrietta Maria, life at court obviously changed a lot, and the influence of the Reformed churches in that group moved away. Charles was not averse to calling for forced loans to be made to the crown, and Gideon had to pay those reluctantly, but he remained a royalist, and which many Huguenots actually did. He died in 1658 at his daughter's home in Highgate. His only son had died surviving son from all those children, had died in 1637. So 1658, and Gideon was about 94, something like that, I think, when he died. And he was buried in the churchyard at St Anne's in Blackfriars with all the pomp and circumstance of an alderman of the City of London, which was a huge procession, and he left this great fortune.
So what about the remaining family then? What happened to this fortune and them?
So there were children, and they were the next generations. Okay, there was Williams was a bit his three sons. One of them died in a house fire in London where everybody was killed near St Paul's, and another one died when a brick wall fell on him, and the third one married late and never had children. So Gideon's fortune passed through to the grandson, to these, and to us, ended up at one of the girls, but her daughters were spinsters, and so finally it passed to a distant cousin, and the whole thing came to an end, which is sort of quite a sad way to think of it in many ways. Yes, his great legacy is of course Apothecaries Hall and Blackfriars, and the Great Fire destroyed virtually all of Gideon's world. His house was gone, everything was gone. The church he worshipped at was gone. When he was buried, there was a great vault in the entry of the church where the family went with a big stone over the top of it, declaring that this was the DeLaune family vault. Disappeared, all gone. The church wasn't rebuilt. The parish was amalgamated with St Andrew by the Wardrobe. The land that it occupied was added to the burial ground that is now that little island yard. By the time the fire went through there, the DeLaunes had left living in Blackfriars. They were living in Kent. William had died, and his widow, before the fire, his widow remarried, and she sold the DeLaune property in Blackfriars to the Apothecaries, so they were able to increase their space there. And the Apothecaries Hall was as you know, was the oldest. It was the first to be rebuilt. It's an interesting point that the French church was the first church to be rebuilt after. It was completed by 1669. The French Reformed Church had built their church again. So,
And have you got a favourite story about any of these DeLaunes?
Paul's story, the brother Paul's story. He's the one who went off to Padua and finished up at the age of 70 as the first physician general of the British Navy on the first designated naval hospital ship, and disappeared, and nobody knows what happened to him. I mean, there's just so many fabulous stories in there, And then there's all the extra odd people around to the sides, the odd pirate and the odd this and that and the other.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for sharing us the story of the DeLaunes and also the Worshipful Company of Apothecaries. And to our listeners, if you want to know more about the area of Blackfriars, then we do a Best of Blackfriars walk and also a private tour for you to book online at londonguidedwalks.co.uk. That's all for now. See you next time.